We are here at the Multi-Purpose Community Center in Dlamini in Soweto. The reason we're here is because today, this afternoon, in fact, it will be the official memorial service of struggle stalwart Rita Ndzanga. Many young people might ask, who is that? I've got two guests with me who will explain that shortly. She passed on last week at the age of 88. Interestingly, she passed on just a week after she visited the graves of two other struggle stalwarts in South Africa. That was Helen Joseph and Lillian Ngoyi. She herself, Rita Ndzanga, has an illustrious struggle credentials. And she was a trade unionist, she was an activist, and in the 70s, not only was she banned by the apartheid regime, but several times she was detained, tortured, and held in solitary confinement. In fact, in 1969, together with several other women, the likes of Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela and Joyce Kakana, they were all detained and tried. But let me not dwell too much on that. The program this afternoon, which we hope to bring you live later on, includes tributes by family members, by a number of organizations, and later on, the keynote tribute will be delivered by the former president, Mvuyelwa Thabo Mbeki, who, while he was president in 2004, he awarded Me Rita Ndzanga the Order of Luthuli. But let's bring in our guest this hour, just so you can tell us a little bit more about it. I've got with me Mr. Louis Ramuno, and I've got Mr. Jabu Ngwenya. Both these gentlemen were close friends and comrades of the late Me Ndzanga. Gentlemen, good afternoon. It is a sad occasion, but at the same time, I understand you'll also be celebrating a life that was selfless and dedicated to the struggle against apartheid. Let me start with you first, Mr. Ramuno. What are your recollections of Me Ndzanga?
Hi, Brendan. I first met Comrade Rita in the 80s, 1980 to be precise. As a trade unionist. They've just broken away from BAU, and then the union which I belong to, that she recruited me to be a member of, was then called General and Allied Workers Union, which is GAU. That was my first introduction to Comrade Rita. And Comrade Rita is, in fact, we always refer to her as our political mother, not as a friend as such. And she always referred
So, like, you were mentored by her in a way, as a mother. Mr. Ngwenya, was it the same experience with you? Was she a mentor?
Yes, Ndzanga. Nahlangana naye through uCastro Mayatula, who was by then working with Christian Institute. Introduced Ndzanga. Then through Ndzanga, then I met Abo Eliot Shabangu, Abo Poloto, Samson Do, and also the one who died in Zimbabwe. Yes, Barbara Chokabi. So those people I was introduced to them through Rita Ndzanga.
She was surrounded, from what you've said, by lots of comrades and friends and people who were in the struggle. You've mentioned her roots in the trade union world. I mean, she was also way back with the Railway and Harbours Union. She was also one of the people who was involved in the founding of SACTU, the South African Congress of Trade Unions, which some people would say was a forerunner of what we know today as COSATU.
Exactly, Brendan. Comrade Rita is one of the few stalwarts who actually were founding members of two federations, as you've indicated, SACTU and COSATU. And you see that there's 30 years, 30 years apart. And she's a founding member of both those federations. She and GAU was one of the main driving force within the unions that actually saw the formation of COSATU, precisely because we had people such as Comrade Rita. And comrades will joke that it is Gao, through people like Comrade Rita, who gave COSATU its politics, precisely because of this tradition that we talk of SACTU. And yes, and but you touch also on the period that precedes that. That precedes
that's a period from the 50s.
From the 50s, where they doubled up. Comrade Rita and the late husband and their comrades, they doubled up, not only as your leaders of SACTU, but also of the ANC. And quite interesting, and you touched on that also, but then that when Comrade Rita and them used to say that, there's a popular view out there that when the leadership was jailed in the 60s, there was a lull. And Comrade Rita was saying there was no lull. There was no lull. In fact, if you look at the history, after the leadership was actually incarcerated, there are lots of political trials that followed.
And also there was activity that happened up to 1973 with the first strikes, and that encouraged her to really go on and be a warrior for labor rights in the country. Mr. Ngwenya?
Yes, but Mam Ndzanga was versatile. Umam Rita also through her in many times is that Mam Ndzanga used to send me to recruit different people. He had an eye on people that I must go and recruit. So I was sent one of them, just to mention, there are many. One of them was Uchesi Duarte. I went to meet the brother Mohammed Dengo and Nomam Rita Kliptau. They gave me instruction to say, Jabo, just go and get Uchesi to become part of the movement. By then it was that was FETRO. It was a women's group. So that's how I went to pick up to get to Uchesi.
She had the ability to identify, let's call them the foot soldiers for the liberation struggle, for the anti-apartheid struggle, for the liberation movement, as we are saying there. And I think in 1976, we might recall, after the June 16 riots, that she was also very, very instrumental and active in supporting the students.
Yes, she was. To an extent is that she was also taking out students to go and train to the camps of the ANC, and then hence she was arrested with her husband, with Ketla Shulubane and others. So
I see Ketla Shulubane is on the program. And let's just remind our viewers the fact that Mr. Lawrence Ndzanga died in detention in 1977. This was like a couple that was dedicated to the liberation struggle. They were warriors for labor rights and for the liberation struggle as a whole. But she was also a warrior. I've seen her being described as a warrior for women emancipation. And as I said in our introduction, just 10 days before she passed on, she was actually at the gravesite of two of those women struggle heroes.
Yes, no, exactly. She played a very vital role also in the 1956 march of the women. She was one of the leaders, and throughout her life, as you correctly had indicated, Bradren, is that she believed in the emancipation of women and also the introduction of young women in the struggle also. And that was one of her passion.
Yeah, I see there are several women who are going to be speaking who are on the memorial service program this afternoon, the likes of Susan Shabang, who will be known to many South Africans as being in the government of the day.
Also, just to add on and help, Mam Ndzanga was not a person who takes a decision for you. She makes sure when she speaks with you, then you take your decision on yourself. She'll push you towards that you bring your own solution. She didn't dictate anything and say you must do this and so on. So that was the strength of Rita Ndzanga.
Yeah, I've read his. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Also, I've been also arrested with her during 81, 80 during the Neil Eggett when he passed on in prison. Mam Ndzanga was one of the also people who was tortured So I used to hear her screams and ever through 10th floor. And the person who was in charge of her was Conrad, the major there. So I'll say is that she was also strong, regardless of that. Even when we saw each other, is that in prison, she wouldn't say I know her, and I wouldn't have known her. So this is what used to happen.
Yeah, you know, I'm pleased that you are mentioning Neil Agate. I mean, because he's known as having been that supporter in the trade union movement. Because Mam Ndzanga, from what I've heard, she was very instrumental in the rise of the progressive, non-racial trade union movement.
Certainly, certainly. In fact, that is what precipitated their move away from BAU, because BAU was basically a black...
Yeah, it was the Black Allied Workers Union.
Workers Union, but also driven by the political outlook of black consciousness. And that's actually because Comrade Rita Ndzanga, Mam Rita, and those who were with her, your Polotos, and that you mentioned, then broke away precisely because of their belief in non-racial. And it's not only non-racial, because you also had trade unions who were non-racial but not progressive.
Okay, yeah, that's an important distinction to make. The program was supposed officially to start at 2 o'clock. I think we're about 13 minutes or so after 2. I don't know when it will start. I don't want to delay any further, but you are still with me. When you think of the role that a woman who's been described as a selfless person, a warrior for rights, who was defiant right to the end, who never gave up. As I said, just at the beginning of this month, she went to pay tribute and speak in the commemoration on the grave sites of two of the women who were part of the 1956 march, Lillian Ngoyi and Helen Joseph. She was really involved, and she had a message for the country, young people, especially young women, to carry on with the struggle for women's emancipation. But when you hear all of this, in your view, as people who were mentored by her, I'll start with you, Mr. Ngwenya. You were at some point jailed with her in 1981, at the same time as Neil Agate was imprisoned and killed at John Vorster in Johannesburg. How do you want South Africans, how do you want this country to honor her memory?
Is that I'll say on additionally that what I would like to add from my Mam Ndzanga is that when COSAS was founded, I'm giving an example now to say, is that he made sure that also we used to use her house, and most of the first executive of that COSAS Congress, Hepinchingila, Meeting, Pilima Setla, Rola Masinga, were at her house, and then that's where the whole plans that were drawn. So in a way, we had her approval. So you can see throughout the 80s and other times and so on, when there were student boycotts, is that her leadership will be say, go back to school. We are students only when we're at school. You can't be outside school and become students. So that's Mam Ndzanga. So this is what I can describe her as, that particular person who always seek for progress. What I'm trying to say is that the system by then, it was never clocked, regardless of student boycotting. Then right now is that the students, the system have clocked. We're not producing lots of good students. Even by the time Mam Ndzanga was there, we're in 50% pass rate. Now we're having 33% pass rate. So that's a difference, that's a big difference of what Mam Ndzanga created.
So would you say fixing the education system to make sure it produces the right quality of student would be a tribute to her memory?
Exactly, that's what I'm saying, is that people must take education very seriously, because right now is that we also happened to destroy the middle class, the Obonyembezi that were writing books in Zulu, Sotho, and Shangaan, and so on. All those people, we wiped them away. So what is happening? That's why today we have a problem of, in terms of culture, people don't respect, people don't, they fight, there's violence, and so on, because people, they don't know who they are. because the school, those books were helping us to shape us who we are today.
Yeah, so her memory has to be living through the better education. Your thoughts about how the country can honor her memory?
No, I agree completely with Jabu. I agree with him completely. That, all those values that she actually sacrificed her life, and even in the face of harassment and incarceration and beatings, these are values that Rita would never surrender, and it is those values that should be guiding all young people going forward. Earlier, you spoke about her not being known, and that is what defined Rita, because she was not one looking for recognition. Was recognition independent, and a very humble person. And those are the attributes which I see lacking these days, particularly in the type of in our leadership and so forth. And I think they can take a leaf from that.
Mr. Ramuno, thank you very much, Louis Ramuno, for your reflections there about your mentor, a selfless leader. I'm now joined by Ms. Susan Shabangu. Welcome to Today on eNCA. Thank you very much. You can come a little bit closer so we can... There you go. Thank you very much. You are here, I see you're on the program as well. You are here to honor and pay tribute to Rita Ndzanga, who's just been described as someone who was selfless, an ethical leader, who even worked with the youth right through, even in the 70s, despite being detained and tortured and held in solitary confinement. And she remained committed to the cause right to the end. Just 10 days before she passed on, she was commemorating the Lillian Ngoys of this world and Helen Joseph in terms of that 1956 march. Your sense of what she stood for and what she would be remembered for?
Well, I must say, Mam Rita stood for the truth, number one. Very firm, but disciplined. People don't say that she was one of the most disciplined elderly people and committed to the struggle. And why I'm saying that, it's because as young people, Mam Rita never saw us as young people, but he looked at us as young, but also comrades, and respected us, because we've worked with her in the formation of the revival of the women's organization, which was FETRO then, and there were the elderly people who were mentoring us on how we need to mobilize women. And you must know that that was the time when the ANC and the Women's League were banned. And they will always advise us to go and talk to the elderly people who were members of the ANC. Some of them were banned. And because we're very young, and we were a bit, naughty, because we saw that they're saying we must go and talk to elderly people. But we used to fulfill the commitment and what they were saying we must do. And she was one of the elderly women who was with us as an activist, even in the formation or revival of the Federation of Transvaal Women, with the background of the Federation of South African Women. And they also help us in understanding the ANC, including the ANC Women's League, in the struggle of South Africa.
She was a warrior for women's emancipation.
She was a warrior for us as women, but also she never stopped. I must say that she wasn't, even now, she died being that warrior. Not long ago I was with her, and that spirit, it was there. You could feel that activism in her was still there.
Was she disappointed with some of the challenges the country faces today and the fact that some of the leaders have become corrupt?
Well, she was disappointed. The last time we spoke, she was saying, "Hey Susie, banake, re tlo di etsa yang ka dintho tse di etsagalang gona yaanong. A go shebe gore mokgatlo wa rona wa wa." They were very worried about the corruption, but also lack of mobilization and honesty amongst the leaders of the ANC. And I think it's some of the people, even if they were still committed, but they were disappointed by the behavior of some of the current leadership.
So in honoring her memory, do you think then you have to focus on building ethical leadership?
We have to, it's not a choice. We have to deal build ethical leadership in the ANC, but not only that, go back to the people, do what they did in the 50s, mobilize and talk to our people. You know, the issue of trying to modernize the ANC, forgetting the basic principles of grassroots mobilization, door to door, talking to our people, understanding their problems, will not take us forward.
She stood for non-racialism even in the trade unionist world. That's why she left the Black Allied Workers Union to be able to form an all-embracing kind of trade union, progressively so. What do you think about non-racialism in her memory?
Well, in her memory, I'm very fortunate to be one of those young people who worked with her when GAU was formed, General and Allied Workers Union. I've worked closely with her, and she has managed to teach us, because some of us are your 1976 young people. So the issue of non-racialism, we could not understand it. It didn't make sense for us, because for us, race was the enemy. And she's one of the people who taught us about non-racialism, that it's not about the color, it's the system. So we've learned a lot from her, but I must also say, even skilling, she was not just involved in the trade union, but she was also involved in skilling. She used to run a factory making ANC Women's League blouses. So she was multi-skilled. So she taught us a lot, and also cooking and all those things.
A hard worker indeed. We'll have to let you go, Ms. Susan Shabanga, because I understand you're going to be on the program shortly, and they started singing inside. But thank you very much for your reflections.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you. That's Susan Shabangu, of course, who's part of the government here. She's played different roles in the cabinet, but she's one of those younger generation people who knew Me Rita Ndzanga, who's being honored here this afternoon at this Dlamini Multipurpose Community Center in Soweto through an official memorial service. Her funeral service, the official funeral service, will be a provincial one that will take place on Saturday in the northwest. That's a province where she was born. She was born in a village near Ventersdorp. Now, struggle stalwart Rita Ndzanga being remembered today, as I've said, with this memorial service here in Soweto. She died last Wednesday at the age of 88. The grandson, Lawrence Ndzanga, says he will remember his grandmother's unconditional love.
There's just so many memories, you know. I could never really pick one, but I just loved how caring she was, and I learned true unconditional love from my grandmother, because no matter what mistakes I would do, she would forgive me, and she would, you know, teach me a lesson, and I would always come out better for that, you know. And as for her activism, I really think she was an inspiring figure, not only in the community of Snawane, but in South Africa as a whole, for not only just women, but people in general. You know, she was resilient, and I think that's something we can take away from her as well, like through whatever times you're going through, just remain resilient.